Hi everyone, my name is Julia Campos, and for today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the Mexico peso crisis of 1994 to 1995. This specific crisis was a big economic problem that affected a lot of people in Mexico and even had impacts in other countries. In this presentation, I'll go over what caused the recession to happen, how the government responded, and what we can learn from this specific example. So, talking about root causes of the crisis, there were a few major reasons that this crisis happened. First, Mexico's currency, as we know as the peso, was overvalued or started to become overvalued. And the main reason for this was because the Mexican government took on a lot of debt using what we know as tesobonos and cetes. Secondly, banking mismanagement. Banks weren't managed very well after they were sold to private owners. This was a different situation that happened where banks were sold from one owner to the other, from government to public owner, and then public owner back to government. So this was something that led or was a very big root cause of this recession. Um, Basically, many banks were managed by, when sold to private owners, they were managed by a management that had no experience or even knowledge of what the banking sector was and how important it was to the economy. So they took on a lot of debt and made some decisions that were not very smart. Um, Thirdly, there was a lot of political tension during this time, especially after the Zapatista uprising, which ended up making a lot of foreign investors nervous. In a couple words, the Zapatista uprising was a time in Mexico where a group of people rebelled against the government, and around and because of these rebellions, a lot of danger was made, and a lot of assassinations took place. Um, Also, around this time, the North American Free Trade Act, known as NAFTA, started. Uh, and because of NAFTA, a lot of foreign money came in very quickly into Mexico's economy, but most of it didn't stay very long. When things got risky and when the economy started its downfall, the money left just as fast as it came in. So moving on to government response and policies. In order to deal with the crisis, the Mexican government took some fast actions. They initially started by raising taxes and cutting their spendings in a attempt to save money. They also raised interest rates to try and stop the peso from losing even more of its value. Another response from the government was Mexico's huge bailout that they received from the US and the International Monetary Fund, known as IMF. They received the total, about the amount of $52 billion from this agreement. And also in January of 1995, the Mexican government made a deal with its businesses and its workers, known as the Agreement of Unity for Economic Emergency, and this was also done in an attempt to try and make the economy more stable. So economic theories behind the government's response. The government's actions were based on two economic ideas. One of them being Keynesian theory, which says that during a crisis, the government should help protect jobs and support the economy. For example, like using international aid. I just gave a previous example how Mexico got bailout money from the U.S. and the International Monetary Fund. So that's a good example of that. The other is monetarist theory, which focuses more on controlling inflation and keeping the economy stable in the long term. And that's also the main reason why the Mexican government initially started off by raising interest rates in an attempt to stop the recession from happening. And based off of these two examples that I gave, Mexico, it's clear that Mexico used a little bit of both of these ideas to try and fix their upcoming problem. Moving on to outcomes and lessons, even with these actions that the government took, the crisis still ended up having serious effects. The peso lost more than half of its value. Prices went up and got very expensive, which was the result of inflation going over 50%. And eventually, Mexico went into a recession as expected, and many investors lost trust in the country's economy. And by investors, I'm talking about the investors that the NAFTA agreement brought into Mexico. I believe that in the long run, Mexico learned that a fast economic growth needs to come with political stability, obviously clear rules, and a strong oversight to keep things from falling apart, as we just learned here, which was a great example of that. And in conclusion, as I've mentioned already before, NAFTA brought a lot of opportunity to Mexico, which was a good thing in the beginning because that was the main reason that this agreement was made. But it also made the economy more exposed to outside risks, and the main reason for this was because the NAFTA agreement was between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. So clearly, it would bring a lot of risks along with it. The government also took a while to react in the beginning, which made things a lot more worse than if they had took action a little bit quicker. The crisis also showed that it's really important to have a strong planning, to have transparency if you are in an agreement with other countries, and good leadership skills when managing a country's economy. I feel that the reasons that Mexico started or went into recession could have been easily avoided, and because response was a little late, it created this bad outcome, which initially, at the end of the day, made Mexico go into the peso crisis that took them, that made it hard for them to come back from. So this concludes my presentation, and I'd like to thank all of you guys for your attention, and thank you very much.